On a cold December night in Maplewood, Michigan, a frantic 911 call came in. The caller, a concerned neighbor, whispered into the phone, afraid of being heard. "I hear a child crying from the basement. It's been going on for hours. Please, someone needs to check it out." Minutes later, police arrived at the neatly kept suburban home of David and Linda Johnson. To the world, they were devoted foster parents, known for taking in troubled children. But what officers discovered behind their front door told a very different story. As they entered the dimly lit basement, their flashlights landed on a frail, terrified girl curled up on the floor. She was shivering, her ribs painfully visible through her tattered clothing. Her arms were covered in old and fresh bruises. This was Mia Thompson, just 8 years old, a child placed in the care of people who were supposed to protect her. But instead, they became her worst nightmare. In Maplewood, Michigan, they were seen as pillars of the community. David, a respected church deacon, and Linda, a former school teacher with a warm smile and a gentle voice. Their home, a picturesque two-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn, was always decorated for the holidays. Their biological children attended good schools, participated in community events, and seemed to thrive under their parents' care. To neighbors and friends, the Johnsons were the embodiment of selflessness, known for opening their doors to foster children in need. Over the past decade, social services had entrusted them with 5 different foster children, believing the couple provided a stable and loving environment. Home inspections were routine and uneventful, clean rooms, well-stocked pantries, and polite children who never raised any concerns. Caseworkers came and went, reassured by the Johnsons' outward display of responsibility. But behind the closed doors of their seemingly perfect home, a far darker reality was unfolding. One that no neighbor, no caseworker, and no friend had ever suspected. Beneath the surface of their well-manicured life, David and Linda Johnson harbored a sinister secret, one that would shock their quiet suburban neighborhood to its core. Mia Thompson had already endured more heartbreak in her short life than most could imagine. At just 6 years old, she lost both of her parents in a devastating car accident, leaving her alone in the world. With no relatives able to care for her, she was placed into the foster system, a world that was supposed to protect and nurture her. Instead, Mia found herself shuffled from one temporary home to another, each placement only a short-term fix in a system that often failed its most vulnerable. Then, social services placed her with David and Linda Johnson, a couple who had fostered multiple children before. They assured the caseworkers that Mia would have a loving, stable home. They smiled, made promises, and spoke of giving her the childhood she deserved. But within days of arriving, Mia realized the horrifying truth. She was not there to be part of a family. She was there to be a servant. The Johnsons' biological children were doted on, given warm beds and hearty meals. Mia, on the other hand, lived a starkly different existence. Food was a privilege, not a guarantee. While the other children sat down to full plates, Mia ate scraps, if anything at all. Some nights, she went to bed with an empty stomach, her small frame growing thinner by the day. She had no bed, no comfort. While the Johnsons' children snuggled under thick blankets in their warm rooms, Mia was forced to sleep on a thin mat in the corner of the laundry room or on the cold basement floor. She became their unpaid laborer. The moment she woke up, her tasks began. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, did laundry, and even cared for the younger foster children. If she didn't work fast enough or made a mistake, she would be punished. The cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological. "You're nothing," Linda would sneer. "No one wants you. That's why you're here." Every day, Mia was reminded that she was unwanted, unloved, and disposable. David was no better. He ruled the house with cold indifference, his punishments swift and merciless. If Mia displeased him, she was locked in the basement, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. No blankets, no light, just the cold concrete and the crushing weight of her loneliness. The signs were there, but no one paid attention. She was rarely allowed to bathe. Her hair became matted, her clothes filthy. She smelled of neglect, yet no one intervened. She was kept home from school. Her absence should have raised alarms, but in an overburdened system, it was simply overlooked. She had no access to medical care. When she fell sick, she was told she was faking. No doctor visits. No concern. Just suffering in silence. For 2 years, Mia endured this torment, trapped in a home that was supposed to protect her. She had no one to turn to, no voice to speak for her. Until one fateful night, when the abuse could no longer be hidden. December 14, 2023, was supposed to be a joyful evening in Maplewood. A fierce snowstorm had blanketed the town in white, but that didn't stop David and Linda Johnson from throwing their annual Christmas gathering. Inside their cozy, well-decorated home, guests sipped hot cocoa, exchanged gifts, and admired the twinkling lights that adorned every corner of the house. The scent of fresh cookies and spiced cider filled the air, laughter echoing through the halls. To the outside world, the Johnsons were the picture of generosity and holiday cheer, kind-hearted foster parents who opened their home to children in need. But while the guests reveled in holiday warmth upstairs, 8-year-old Mia Thompson lay shivering in the basement below. Mia hadn't eaten a full meal in days. Her small, frail body trembled from both hunger and the bitter cold. The basement, unfinished and unheated, was a stark contrast to the festive world above. Dressed in nothing more than the same thin, soiled clothes she had worn for days, she curled up against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Her stomach twisted in painful knots, her body growing weaker by the hour. But worse than the physical pain was the overwhelming hopelessness. The muffled sounds of celebration above felt like a cruel reminder, there was joy in this house, but not for her. There was warmth, love, and laughter, but none of it belonged to her. She had been locked away like she didn't exist. And for 2 years, she had accepted it. She had endured. Until now. That night, something inside Mia snapped. She could no longer stay silent. She could no longer accept that this was her life. So, with every ounce of strength she had left, she screamed. She screamed for help. She screamed out of pain. She screamed out of desperation. Upstairs, the party continued. The music was too loud, the laughter too distracting for anyone inside the house to hear. But outside, the wind had quieted. The snow had begun to settle. And a neighbor walking her dog on the sidewalk stopped in her tracks. She heard it. A child scream, roar and terrified, cutting through the still night air. She paused, listening. It wasn't the playful shout of children at a party. It wasn't the sound of holiday excitement. It was something else, something chilling, something that made her skin crawl. Something was very, very wrong. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. And at 9:47 p.m., she dialed 911. It was a call that would finally bring the nightmare inside the Johnsons' home to light. The knock on the door was firm. The Johnsons weren't expecting visitors this late, let alone the police. David and Linda exchanged quick glances before Linda pulled open the front door, immediately masking any sign of unease with a warm, practiced smile. "Officers," she greeted them with cheerful confusion. "What seems to be the problem?" The two uniformed officers remained stoic. "We received a call about a disturbance. Someone heard a child screaming from this house." Linda let out a light-hearted chuckle, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, that must have been the kids playing. You know how loud they can be during the holidays." David nodded, folding his arms. "Everything's fine here, officers." But the officers weren't convinced. One of them stepped forward, his gaze hard. "We need to see all the children in the home. Including Mia Thompson." The name hit like a hammer. For the briefest moment, Linda's smile faltered. David stiffened. A flicker of panic flashed across both their faces. And the officers saw it. Linda hesitated before forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Of course. Just give me a moment." But one of the officers was already moving past her, scanning the home. That's when he noticed it, the locked basement door. "Open it," he ordered. David's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "That's just storage, officer. There's nothing." "Open it. Now." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, with shaking hands, Linda reached for the key. The moment the lock clicked open, a wave of icy air rushed past them. The officers stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. And then they saw her. Mia Thompson, just 8 years old, lay curled in the corner of the basement, barely clinging to consciousness. Her frail body trembled from the cold, her ribs clearly visible beneath her thin, tattered shirt. The bruises along her arms and legs told a horrifying story, some yellowed with age, others fresh and angry. Her lips were cracked, her skin dry from dehydration. She was too weak to cry. Too weak to even react to the sudden beam of light exposing her suffering. One officer inhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. The other quickly reached for his radio, requesting an ambulance. Now. As the call went out, the officers turned back toward the couple. The warmth was gone from their faces, replaced by something much darker. "David and Linda Johnson, you are under arrest for child neglect and abuse." The cuffs clicked shut around their wrists. Neighbors had begun gathering outside, drawn by the flashing police lights. They stood in stunned silence as the seemingly perfect couple, the devoted foster parents, the respected community members, were led out of their home in disgrace. But even in that moment, as her crimes were laid bare for all to see, Linda Johnson had one last thing to say. "She's lying," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "That girl lies about everything." The officers ignored her. Because MIA Thompson didn't have to lie. The truth was written all over her broken body. MIA was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed the worst. She was severely malnourished, weighing nearly 20 pounds below the healthy range for her age. Dehydration had left her body weak, and her untreated wounds told a horrific story of prolonged suffering. Some bruises had faded, others were fresh, evidence of the cycle of abuse she had endured. She was alive, but just barely. 4 days, she remained under medical supervision, slowly regaining strength. The nurses who cared for her were heartbroken, some even moved to tears by the sheer resilience in her eyes. Despite everything, she was still fighting. Meanwhile, the investigation into David and Linda Johnson was in full swing. What detectives uncovered painted an even darker picture than anyone imagined. As prosecutors dug deeper, the evidence against the Johnsons became overwhelming. Falsified reports, social services records showed glowing reports about Mia's well-being, all submitted by the Johnsons themselves. Fake doctor visits, fabricated school attendance, and staged photographs had kept authorities from seeing the truth. Financial fraud. The Johnsons had been pocketing thousands of dollars in government assistance meant for their foster children. While their biological children wore designer clothes and attended private programs, MIA had been left to starve. A disturbing pattern. Investigators discovered that MIA wasn't the first child to suffer under their care. A previous foster child had shown signs of abuse before being quietly transferred to another home. The system had failed once before, and nearly failed MIA, too. The trial was swift and highly publicized. National news outlets covered the shocking case, sparking outrage across the country. Advocates called for reform, demanding stricter monitoring of foster homes. In April 2024, the verdict came down. David Johnson was sentenced to 25 years in prison for aggravated child abuse, neglect, and endangering the welfare of a minor. Linda Johnson received 20 years, with the judge condemning her actions as unforgivable. Neither showed remorse as they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Linda, defiant as ever, still insisted MIA was a liar. But this time, no one believed her. After months of recovery, MIA was placed in a new foster home, one where she was truly wanted and cared for. For the first time in years, she had warm meals, a soft bed, and a family who treated her with love. Her scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. She still struggled with nightmares, flinching at loud voices, and hesitating before trusting anyone. But day by day, she was reclaiming her childhood. Mia's case became a catalyst for change. Lawmakers pushed for stricter foster care regulations, while authorities re-examined thousands of cases to ensure no other children were suffering in silence. But one question haunted everyone. How many more children were still trapped in homes like the Johnsons, waiting for someone to hear their screams? For MIA, justice had come. But for too many others, the nightmare continues. Mia's story is more than just a case of child abuse, it is a tragic reminder that not all foster homes are safe. While foster care is meant to provide children with stability and love, it sometimes becomes a breeding ground for neglect, cruelty, and unimaginable suffering. David and Linda Johnson fooled the system for years. They passed inspections, deceived caseworkers, and maintained a spotless reputation in their community. They were the last people anyone suspected of being abusers. But the cracks were always there, hidden in plain sight. How many more predators like them exist? How many other children are suffering behind closed doors, their cries unheard? Mia's case has reignited discussions about the foster care system and its many failures. Lawmakers, child welfare advocates, and social workers are debating how such a tragedy was allowed to happen. Key issues include lack of oversight. Home visits are often predictable and infrequent, giving abusive foster parents time to cover up the truth. Understaffed and overwhelmed agencies. Caseworkers are overworked, managing too many cases at once, making it easy for warning signs to slip through the cracks. Inadequate background checks. Some foster parents, like the Johnsons, have hidden financial and behavioral red flags that go unnoticed. Failure to listen to children. Many abused foster kids are too afraid to speak up, and when they do, their complaints are dismissed or ignored. The system is failing the very children it was designed to protect. For MIA, justice came, but at a terrible cost. She endured years of suffering before anyone noticed. But what about the children whose stories don't make the news? The time for debate is over. The time for action is now. We must do better. For MIA. For the thousands of children like her. Before it's too late. This is just one story, one heartbreaking case that should have been prevented. But Mia's suffering is not unique. Behind closed doors, in neighborhoods across the country, countless children are living a silent nightmare, trapped in homes where they should feel safe but instead endure fear, hunger, and abuse. For every MIA, there are hundreds, maybe thousands, of others who remain unheard. Some are too afraid to speak. Some have been ignored for too long. And some may not survive unless someone notices the signs. Child abuse often hides in plain sight. A quiet child who never speaks. A neighbor's muffled cries at night. A student who suddenly stops coming to school. If you suspect something is wrong, don't stay silent. One phone call can save a life. Report unusual behavior. If a child seems constantly afraid or malnourished, trust your instincts. Listen to children. If they hint at something being wrong, take it seriously. Call for help. If you hear or see something suspicious, notify Child Protective Services or law enforcement. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to care enough to act. Because for a child like MIA, your voice could be the only one that matters.